Good morning, Year 8. I hope you're well and having a lovely day. Please could you write the date and the title, The Artful Dodger and Juvenile Crime. For your do now, I'd like you to answer these questions. What impression do you have of the boy standing talking to Oliver? And what does his name reveal about his lifestyle? So pause the video now to jot down your answers to those questions. Okay, so task 1. I would like you to read the description of the Artful Dodger. What evidence is there that he lives roughly, and what's odd about his clothing and his manner? So let's read through it together. The boy was about his own age, but one of the queerest looking boys that Oliver had ever seen. He was a snub-nosed, flat-browed, common-faced boy enough, and as dirty a juvenile as one would wish to see. But he had about him all the airs and manners of a man. He was short of his age, with rather bow legs and little sharp, ugly eyes. His hat was stuck on the top of his head so lightly that it threatened to fall off every moment, and would have done so very often if the wearer had not had a knack of every now and then giving his head a sudden twitch, which brought it back to its old place again. He wore a man's coat, which reached nearly to his heels. He had turned the cuffs back, halfway up his arm, to get his hands out of the sleeves, apparently with the ultimated view of thrusting them into the pockets of his corduroy trousers, for there he kept them. He was, altogether, as roistering and swaggering a young gentleman as ever stood 4 feet 6, or something less, in the bluchers. So pause the video now to answer the 2 questions. Okay, so evidence he lives roughly, please see the highlighted sections. He's dirty, short for his age, wears ill-fitting clothing. In terms of what's odd about his clothing and manner, his clothes are too big for him, and he acts older than he is, both in the wearing of adult clothes and in his overconfident manner. So who is the Artful Dodger, and what role does he play in Oliver Twist? The Artful Dodger is one of the child criminals in the gang led by Fagin. Fagin is a miser, so miser means you don't like to spend money very much, who teaches children to make their livings by pickpocketing and other criminal activities in exchange for shelter. He is a violent man who punishes the children when they return from their day's work empty-handed. Fagin recognizes the Artful Dodger's talents and calls him his best hand. We first meet the Artful Dodger soon after Oliver has arrived in London, after running away from Mr. Sowerberry. Mr. Sowerberry was the man who bought Oliver from the workhouse after they sold him for asking for more gruel. The Artful Dodger approaches Oliver and persuades him to come back to the gang's base. Fagin then enlists Oliver into the gang and gets the Artful Dodger and his friend Charlie Bates to teach Oliver how to steal. Why do you think Jack is called the Artful Dodger? And why is he described by Fagin as the head of the criminal gang as his best hand? Pause the video for a few moments to answer these questions. So he's called the Artful Dodger and Fagin's best hand because he is the best at pickpocketing, which was one of the ways the gang made their money. Task 2. I'd like you to read the extract and answer these questions. Why was Oliver the one being chased? What did the Artful Dodger and Charlie do when they saw Oliver being chased? What makes Oliver fall down? What is the attitude of the people chasing and catching Oliver? Find evidence from the text to support your answer. Do you think this was an appropriate reaction to street theft? Why or why not? Pause the video to answer these questions. So answers. Oliver was chased because he was the one seen running at the time the theft was discovered. They ran away, he was struck on the head, they all joined enthusiastically in the pursuit, tearing, yelling, screaming, knocking down the passengers as they turned the corners, rousing up the dogs and astonishing the fowls. Sample response. It seems excessive, as only a handkerchief was stolen, and the culprit is only a little child. It almost seems as if the crowd enjoy chasing the boy and ensuring he gets punished, not out of a sense of justice, but due to the thrill of the chase. Juvenile crime in the 19th century. Youth crime had been a concern since the 1700s. However, since the decline in apprenticeships and as a result of industrialization disrupting families, criminal gangs of boys and girls made youth crime a rising concern in the 19th century. Evidence from courts and newspaper articles suggests that juvenile crime was a serious problem at the time Dickens was writing Oliver Twist. Picking of pockets was especially common, especially the theft of silk handkerchiefs. Crowded places, such as fairs, marketplaces, and public executions, were particularly profitable for young thieves. The treatment of juvenile criminals in the 19th century was harsh. After 1800, children between the ages of 7 and 14 were considered incapable of forming criminal intentions, but they could still be found guilty. In theory, children convicted of serious felonies faced the full penalty of the law, namely sentences of imprisonment, transportation, and death. Death sentences for boys and girls under 16 were in practice usually commuted to transportation. By the 1830s, each year around 5,000 prisoners, some of whom were as young as 10, were carried by ship to penal colonies in Australia to serve sentences of 7 or 14 years, and occasionally life. Alternative punishment options were often used to deal with child criminals. Whipping or flogging, for example, was frequently used until the end of the century. Jail was an appropriate punishment for children caught stealing. How do you think the authorities should have dealt with these children? Pause the video to jot down your ideas. Okay, Dickens, a social campaigner. Task 3. Dickens was a social campaigner as well as a successful novelist. In addition to highlighting social issues through his novels, he made speeches and wrote letters on all sorts of social justice issues, from public executions to child labour. Imagine you find out about a child as young as Oliver being arrested and sentenced to jail for petty theft. I'd like you to write a letter of protest to the government or to a national newspaper and propose a better solution. Pause the video now to do this. Okay, and that is the end of today's lesson. Thank you very much for your hard work. I hope you found it interesting and enjoyable. See you next time.